Hey friends, it's Pastor Michael here with my better half. Our hope is that you'll find laughter, joy, and inspiration through some of our zany family stories. All right, it's time for the real stuff. Like the real stuff.
Okay.
So we gave him an intro last time, kind of give him a quick rundown of everything that happened. But I think it's important that we share the actual, like, all of the God stuff in the origin story.
Yeah.
So lots of people who know us have heard this story, but I don't think that everybody quite gets it.
Yeah. There were so many ways. That's why I feel like when we say we got married so quickly, from dating to married, when you can see God's hand in it, it just felt like it wasn't too early. It didn't
feel weird at all. Right. It didn't feel weird at all. It didn't feel like pressured or like, oh gosh, we have to do this in order to have whatever it is that we want. It felt like, okay, this is who I'm spending the rest of my life with because it's who God has put in my path. Now, I say that to say that obviously we love each other, not that like, oh, well, God said, so we got to do it. But it didn't feel rushed. It didn't feel coerced. It didn't feel any of those things that a lot of other people might feel whenever they meet somebody or get married quickly.
Yeah. And I was 18.
Yeah. How old was I?
25.
25. So we need to clear that up. It's their 7-year age difference.
Yeah.
So, and the reason for that is there were no girls my age who were ever going to marry me. Let's be very clear. Like, they all knew better. They're like, this guy's a total loss.
We could probably just say there were no girls.
Wow.
We don't have to put a number on it.
I guess that might be the case. That might be true. So, okay. Where do we start? Do we start with youth group? Is that is that kind of where it started?
Well, no, because let's talk about the first time I met you.
Yeah, because I did not meet you. I did not. Oh, you're right. So story.
Because then I found out you were at this church.
Yeah, the story is a little bit convoluted. It's hard to tell it and not give it away because there are so many parts that you go, oh, very obviously that's what they're talking about. But starting with my being in a little bit of trouble, I had a bit of a situation. We won't get into that today, but we will at some point get into that. Probably talk about Airbnbs at the same time because that'll be a whole emotional breakdown for me. But I was in a little bit of trouble, had to serve some community service, and I did so at, it's not a soup kitchen. It's like Meals on Wheels.
It was more Meals on Wheels.
Meals on Wheels style thing. And I had to go there and I had to help pack lunches. That was my responsibility. And when I got there, I was talking to this older lady. She wasn't very friendly. She definitely did not tolerate my crap. But she asked the group in general, there were a bunch of us there. She asked the group in general if any of us knew of a church that had a youth group. And I said, oh, my church has a youth group. Now, mind you, I had been in trouble, was not at that point in a good standing with the Lord. So let's be super clear about that. It took me a little bit of time to get all of that straightened out in my own life. But I said, oh, my church has a youth group. You should send your daughter to our church. And I don't remember what she said to me, but she asked where it was, and I told her where it was. And she goes, oh, well, it's not super convenient or something of that nature. And I said, oh, well, my dad and I go out on Wednesday nights, and typically he drives, we can pick her up. And the lady said to me, I don't let my daughter ride in cars with strangers, which I thought was hilarious because I was like, all right, whatever, crazy lady. So then I am just kind of existing at that point, like in this plane of like just I'm helping at the church. I'm doing all of the things, and I'm trying to get my life straightened out from the mistakes that I made.
Yeah.
So at some point, I started doing an outside ministry. I'm obviously, as an Elvis impersonator, if you listen to the last episode, you know that, am somewhat musically inclined, and I'm not by any means a rock star or anything like that, but am musically inclined. And I started singing other places. And Good Shepherd United Methodist Church, Reverend Bob James, love the man, miss him dearly. He would, the last Sunday of every month, do a gospel sing. And I would go with a guy who I had met who attended that church. Ray Waldron was his name. Again, he's since passed away. Miss him too. He and his wife, Jerry, they took me under their wing, and I helped them in every way that I could, supported them. They supported me, obviously, in all of my craziness. And I went to almost all of those Sunday night sings. And then I believe it was Jerome James was singing one night, and he knew that I was there, and he asked me if I would sing at his quote-unquote intermission. So during the offering portion, he asked me to sing, and so I did. And I remember after that, Bob came over, and he's like, hey, one of these Sundays, we definitely want to have you come and sing. And I was like, you got it, anytime. You just let me know. And I was super excited to get to do that, and it was several months later that I actually got the opportunity to do that. Now, backstory to that is at the time I was dating a girl and lived in Cleveland. So was not close by. I mean, I was down here a lot because my Elvis stuff brought me down here, nursing homes and hospice and different places that I would go and perform locally here. But for the most part, I was like 70% Cleveland, 30% Tuscarawas County. And so I brought her with me for that particular performance, and she sat towards the front while I sang. And, yeah, so I'll let you take it from there.
Well, I was there because my best friend at the time, that's the church that she went to.
She went to Good Shepherd?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that she was attending at that church.
Yeah.
Well,
yep. That's where her family had gone her whole life.
Gotcha.
And then we brought her over to a Pentecostal church.
Ah!
That was different.
Welcome to the dark side.
Yeah. But anyway, that's where she was. And she's like, hey, this guy's going to have a sing tonight, like come. So I was like, whatever. And I remember you walking out, and I didn't have any boyfriends, but the guys that I thought were cute was you. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I had said, I was like, that's my future husband, like that's my husband right there. And listened to you sing the whole, and I was like, yep, that's it.
Okay, so now it's my turn to jump in on that story. So was driving home to Cleveland that night with the girl who I was at that time engaged to marry, and she was talking in the car, and we were just kind of laughing. And she was in band and was incredibly musically talented, much more so than I ever was. And she's like, dude, you can't keep beat to save your life. She's like, you sing it perfectly. She's like, but you're over there patting on your leg, some random beat. But like there was this banter back and forth. And she goes, oh, by the way, there was this little girl sitting behind me that said she was going to marry you someday. And we wrote it off as that much of the story. I never thought another moment about that. That was the end of it.
Yeah.
Until. So then Chuck and Mary Barger, who were the youth pastors at the time, Yorksville Foursquare, now known as Organic Church, they asked me to help them put together a drama that they wanted to do it on an Easter Sunday. Was that right? Was it Easter Sunday? Yeah, it was Easter Sunday.
I don't remember.
I'm confident it was Easter Sunday because it was in the gym.
I do, yeah.
And at that time, the congregation was so big that we didn't have a choice but to move to the gym for that service because there were so many people. And so we put together a skit to, is it Bonnie Tyler's Turn Around?
Yeah.
Turn Around.
Yeah.
Probably going to get sued for that. And so we put together this little skit to that, and you guys did it. Now, I had no idea still at that point that you were part of that group, that you were involved in any way. I worked with you guys for several weeks putting that together, but had no idea like who you were specifically in any of that.
Yeah. Wait, but to back up.
Okay.
I went to a different church.
Yes.
And I started to come to this youth group just because I would see the sign and I wanted a youth group. And so I just kind of showed up on Wednesday, and I was a part of the youth group only on Wednesday nights for several months. And in that time is when I had first saw you. And then I decided I'm going to try it on a Sunday. And the other church I was going to was in Newcomerstown. So it was like a 15, 20-minute drive. And you were leading worship. And I was like, thank you, Jesus. This is where I was meant to be. And I never went back to the other church.
That poor church. Just lost you. So,
it was a sign. That was sign number one.
That was okay. That may have been sign number one for you, but there were so many little ones. Okay. So fast forward, we do the skit. You go away to college. Mm-hmm. Now you friend me on Facebook right after the,
at the other church.
At the Sunday night sing. You friended me there. Again, never any like beyond just, oh, I saw you at this church. That was really
Yeah.
the only conversation we had.
Yeah.
After that, you go off to college to Malone,
Mm-hmm.
but you weren't allowed to have a car during your freshman year.
No, I had a car. I was afraid to drive in Canton.
Oh, I thought you weren't allowed to have a car on campus.
No, I
Okay.
had one. I was just afraid to drive it. So
Okay.
I didn't want to leave.
Okay. All right. So I offered to come up and pick you up. And again, not really, there's no, at this point, connection. Just like, hey, I know you. We've talked. I remember that you had said something to me and I had prayed for you and I had typed it out. And for a long time, it was saved as like a sticky note on your computer, which again, I didn't know at the time. I didn't know it until after we were married and I saw it on your computer. And I didn't even realize what it was for a long time, even after I saw it the first time. But anyhow, so we had made just a connection there.
Yeah.
And then
even then, I never thought like I'm gonna make him my, but like he was just this really nice guy, and I was gonna be crushing on him.
Yeah.
But like it was not romantic at all.
Right
at that point.
Right. So I pick you up, bring you to church a couple of times, take you back home in the evenings whenever you're done, whatever. And then at some point, I get this wise idea to ask you out on a date. Where were we supposed to go?
I had a boy, big boys.
Danny boys. In Canton, because that's where you were living.
Yeah.
On campus at Canton. And then what'd I do?
You ditched me. He stood me up.
I did. Now, I didn't just like not show up. I did tell you I wasn't coming,
You
but
did.
I still like definitely had no problem doing that. I had no problem doing that. So I told you I'd make it up to you, and a couple of weeks later, I asked you to go to Carrabba's with me.
Mm-hmm.
And we go to dinner at Carrabba's, and what did I do the entire time we were at Carrabba's?
You were flirting with the waitress.
I'm not proud of any of this, but it is 100% true. And I think that in my mind somewhere it was because, again, like, it wasn't super romantic at that point. It's a first date. We're not really bound to anything. And I'm trying to be funny at this point. And my funny does not come off as funny. It comes off as, what's the word? Flirtatious, but almost like dismissive.
Yeah.
Very dismissive of what the time that we were spending together. Yeah. So anyhow, that date is okay. We continue to see each other, and not in any major date settings though.
No.
Like you would come to my house, things like that, but it was never
because
like,
it was really only on the weekends.
Right. So it was never like super heavy. Yeah. Like we weren't going out and seeing movies and
right.
going to dinner every weekend or anything like that. It was just seeing each other and spending time together.
Yeah.
And then I remember the very first time I ever got to go to your house to meet your mother. And we walked through the door. Matter of fact, this was in my Elvis costume, if I'm not mistaken, because you convinced me that I was going, like, just come in and just show her, just come in and meet her. And I was very adamant that I wasn't going to do that, and I did. I walked through the door and meet your mother, and it's the mean old lady from the food kitchen. Like, who would have thought that would have ever been the situation? Because now I'm stammering. I'm like, bah, 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 bah. Because she knows that I have been in trouble. Not that was ever a secret, but, like, it was this, like, you want a first impression to be good on a parent. That one was not going to be good. So it was kind of an uncomfortable situation. But there was that. And then we started to, like, see each other more regularly, and we're mutually exclusive, I would say, at that point.
Yeah.
And then did anything go crazy?
Mm-mm.
No, just kind of like here we are.
We got engaged
in December. No.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
You're
it was
right.
December.
It was
end of December.
It was the day after Christmas.
Yes, it was December 26th. Now, I want to tell the story.
Okay.
So December 26th, you come to the house. You come to my house or my apartment on Trenton Avenue, and you loved those stupid Christmas lights.
Yeah.
Where was that at? What street?
Oh, I don't even know what street.
Everybody who knows.
Over
by the junior high, Rite Aid, the street past Rite Aid, the house always did all of those decorations.
There was so many lights.
Anybody from Yorksville knows exactly who that is, and they all went, oh, that's such and such. They all know. But anyhow, every time we would drive through town, if it were late enough and those lights were on, you would make me drive by there. So I knew when I was going to ask you to marry me, that's where I was going to do it. So we took a walk. We get up there. We're standing under the lights, and I ask you to marry me. And you say to me, I told Jenna I was going to marry you someday. And I realized in that moment that you were that little girl that had told my fiance, or said in the presence of my fiance, that you were going to marry me someday. And so that's just one of those moments where you realize, okay, this is the right thing. This is happening.
Yeah.
it is what it is. We're going to do this. So, but we planned a wedding for like 2 years. We were 2 years out.
Yeah,
from
it
that.
was not so soon.
Yeah.
In our heads.
Yes, for sure.
What we thought.
For sure. So that was in December, end of December.
Mm-hmm.
All of January was normal life. Everything was, you were still at Malone. I was still working.
No. January,
You came back to Kent.
Yeah.
You came back to Kent. You're right. Yeah. And then you had just transferred. Transferred.
I wasn't even there for 2 weeks, I don't think.
And I got the call while I was at work about taking over the store that they were opening in Heath, so down by Newark, Licking County. And I told them I was going to take the job. And I knew that I had to call you and tell you that. So I called you and I said, hey, listen, opportunity. I'm going to take the job. I want you to come with me. But the only way you can do that is we have to get married first. And like whatever that's going to look like, if that's 2 years, whatever. But I'm going to take the job because at the time it was my first step into management leadership and being able to like lead a whole store. And so I was excited about that for myself, but I was thinking selfishly. I was not thinking about our relationship or our marriage or any of those things, just being honest. And I don't remember how the conversation ended up coming up, but it was something to the effect of you said you wanted to go. And I said, well, we can get married. I can ask Florence if she can marry us this Sunday after church. And you said, okay. And sure enough, I asked her, she said yes. And there we were.
Getting married.
Standing in the church on Sunday morning or on Sunday afternoon.
It was after church.
After church, getting married. And I'll never forget that message that she preached because it was about a wife submitting to a husband and all of the things that a man wants to hear whenever. And the best part is none of that is true today.
I remember after my mom was like, no.
To be fair, the message was perfect. I mean, what she said to us was perfect. But,
biblically, and it was biblical.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah. And it was spot on. But we learned that as people, we have to bend a little bit. But it is what it makes us who we are and what we do. So we get married. We move to Newark. And we're there for almost 4 years. Mm-hmm. And then bouncing back and forth with the big boys and managing life in general and understanding, like, what was it going to look like for us long term? Now, let's talk about kids. We got about 13 minutes before we hit a half hour, so we can talk about kids. Okay. I was happy with 2. Like I would have been good not having any more, but you always wanted a lot of kids.
Yeah, and I remember telling you that we had that conversation because I was still going to Malone, so it was when we were just dating, and you said that you didn't want any more kids. Yeah. And I just flat out said, this isn't going to work. I knew I wanted a lot of kids. And I said, I like him, but not that much. and then you said that you would have to think about it or something along those lines. And then you came back with, how about 1?
Can I negotiate?
Can we one more?
Can we negotiate?
Yeah. Can 3 be enough?
Well, and then we didn't think you could have kids for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, how long after we were married was it before we had Emmett?
2 years, maybe 2 years till I got pregnant.
Okay. And that was 2 years of like,
there was
no protection, not trying to stop it. It just wasn't happening. And then, surprise. Here comes Emmett. And then that opened a whole new world to me because you are so extra when it comes to kids. Don't look at me like that. You know you're extra. Okay.
I don't think so.
I know you don't think so, but I think so. Okay, but I come from the world where you just go to a hospital and you deliver a baby.
Oh, yeah.
Not you. Yeah. You're like, I'm not going to have a doctor. I'm going to have a midwife, and I'm going to have a water birth, and I'm going to do all of these things.
I don't know where that ever came from.
I don't either, but I
thought I was stronger than I was.
It sounded crazy. That's for sure. That is for sure. So, but with Emmett, something came along, and you weren't able to do water birth. They had to be supervised by a doctor or something.
Like in my pregnancy. That was the whole reason I chose to go to OSU.
Yes.
To find a midwife that would deliver at OSU.
Yes.
And then it was during the pregnancy they stopped.
Yep. So you weren't allowed to do that. And so I remember OSU from our house was
an hour.
And I remember you telling me it was time to go to the hospital, and I'm thinking we got to take garbage bags and like plan for this because there ain't no way we're making it to Columbus. But fortunately, it was late in the evening.
Yeah.
So
it was easy to get there.
There wasn't a whole lot of traffic. Yeah. We were able to get there pretty quickly. But anyhow, we get there, and how long were you in labor with Emmett? Do you remember? It felt like an eternity to me.
We got there super duper. I actually remember I wasn't.
They weren't going to keep you.
They weren't going to keep me, and then because it was into the night hours, and then after midnight, she told me technically you're 39 weeks, so we can give you like Pitocin. We can essentially induce you now. So they let me stay to kind of labor a little bit because I was barely what they wanted you to be to keep you overnight.
And we were so far away that they were like...
She said if it's going to happen soon, then you're going to have to drive an hour back. So all of that factored into it. But then I had him the next afternoon.
Yeah. Which becomes the whole next story. So we're only going to get to tell Emmett's birth story today, I think. Yeah, we might be able to get through all three. But Emmett's was epic because you decide to deliver with a midwife at OSU, which again is God's work in all of this. Just let's be super clear as you listen to this story, because we get to the hospital, you labor, you do all of the things, and then you deliver Emmett. After you deliver Emmett, I can tell that something's not quite right. The midwife is acting a little bit funny, but she's not like being clear about what's funny.
Yeah.
Like what's not happening the way that she expects it to.
I had no idea.
Right.
I just had Emmett on my chest and I was golden.
Yeah, you were in your own little world over there. But I could sense that something was definitely wrong in the room, and she looked a little frantic and was kind of like trying to figure something out. And it turned out that a lobe didn't detach or something, and you were bleeding.
Yeah.
And it was like a lot of blood. And they were super concerned, and then all of a sudden I'm like up against the wall. There are doctors everywhere, and you have coded at this point. And like, they're telling me, do you have somebody else here with you? So they wanted me to go to the lobby and get your mom, and they were going to send her upstairs with the baby, and they were going to have me stay with you. Now, again, I have no idea what's happening in this moment. I just know it's not good. So I go out and I'm trying to explain to your mom that like they want you to go upstairs with the baby. Something's wrong. And she was an absolute wreck.
Imagine.
Because she was emotional to begin with, and then it was you. So she's an absolute wreck. What's wrong with my baby? What's wrong? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I just need you to go upstairs so I can go back in there. And it was a whole thing. So when I go back in the room, they're like, never mind, we're not sending the baby. We're leaving the baby with her. And they put the baby back on your chest. They put Emmett back on your chest. And I don't, like, there was this collective sigh of relief in the room, and they felt like everything was back to normal, and like they got what they needed to. But had we not been at OSU, it probably would not have ended that way.
I remember her saying to me, it was after they took Emmett from me, she said, if I can't get this bleeding to stop, we have to go back to the OR.
Yeah.
Or not back to, just to the OR.
Yeah.
And at that point I was like, okay,
Yeah.
something's wrong.
Yeah. And so they get you all stabilized and everything's back to normal, and it seems like everything is on the track to be good and healthy. And then you say, I have to go to the bathroom. And I'll never forget this lady's face. It lives in my mind to this day. It was the only time we ever saw this nurse the entire time that we were there. She walks in and I say to her, hey, she needs to use the bathroom. And she goes, okay, that's fine. She's lost a lot of blood, so she should walk with her knees locked so she doesn't pass out. You get to the toilet, you sit down on the toilet and face plant off of that toilet. And I'm in the bathroom with you. You're laying on your face. I pull the little cord, and everybody comes in. They drag you back. I mean, literally, we're dragging you back to the bed to get you up there. And here we are again, a room full of doctors. Yeah. And they said, what happened? I said she needed to go to the bathroom, and the nurse came in and said she needed to walk with her knees locked. And the midwife's like, what were they thinking? And I mean, she was livid. And I'm like, it wasn't my fault. I didn't know. But I felt so guilty because I didn't ask any questions. I just let it happen. Yeah. So we go through the whole process again. They get you good. And it's probably the following morning. We take Emmett upstairs. We're on we're doing recovery stuff.
Yeah, the postpartum.
Yeah. Floor. And they try to do a circumcision. And for some reason, it goes sideways. Now, for all of the haters who say you shouldn't circumcise your kids, just skip past that part. That was a choice that we made. I don't care what you think. It's just what we did. But it went sideways, and it was a whole thing. Like, they couldn't get in to stop bleeding, and, like, they had it wrapped in gauze. And then all of the doctors, like students came in and they unwrapped it and it started bleeding again and they had to take him back. We just wanted to go home. We just wanted to go home and we couldn't go home. So it was just such a situation.
I remember being on the postpartum floor and the nurses who would come in would say, "Oh, you were the one that..." What did they called a code
blue, I think it was. I can't remember for sure.
They said like on the maternity floor that doesn't happen. Yeah. And so I was
you were
known for a couple days.
You were quite known. You made a name for yourself. And then Easton came along. Now, mind you, we didn't think you could have kids, and then all of a sudden you just kept having them. You wouldn't stop. Yeah. I don't know. Like, nobody taught us why. Everybody's like, hey, you should probably. But you had Easton, fairly uneventful.
Yeah.
He was pretty easy, which is good because in birth he was easy, because in life he has not been easy. Right, yeah. We'll get to have a whole episode. We'll introduce each of the kids. We're going to put them on the cast with us. Like, we're going to let each of them come on and talk and tell fun stories about us. And Easton is the wild card. Yeah. So
most of them will not talk. Easton will not be quiet.
He will run the episode. He will run the episode. So then we had Adeline, and again, so Easton was delivered. We had moved back home at that point. He was delivered at Altman Orville. Mm-hmm. Because, again, you stuck with the midwife thing. You know, that's your story, and you're sticking to it. Yep. And then Adeline came. What was the fanfare with her? There was something with her.
The doctor wasn't there when I was needing to give birth.
Yeah, so that's the best part of that story. I forgot. So, well, first of all, let's back up to the time that you called me and said that my mom was taking you to the hospital because you couldn't feel her move or her heartbeat. Yeah. I was like 2.5 hours away from you. My boss had to drive me to the hospital. I was an absolute wreck, cried the whole way because I didn't know what was going on and I couldn't be there. Miraculously, we managed to get there almost the exact same time. Like, we walked in at almost the exact same time. And everything was fine, and they sent us home, and everything was good to go. And then you decided it was time to deliver. So we fly back to the hospital. This wasn't like back-to-back or anything like that. We get back to the hospital, and we get there, and they're like, we don't have a doctor to deliver a baby. Like, there's nobody around. And I'm like, well, you better call someone. And they were like, no, she'll be fine. She's not quite ready to deliver yet. So they decide that you decide you're going to take a nap.
Yeah.
And I remember you waking up and you said to me, I need to push.
Yeah.
And so I go out to the nurse's station. I'm like, hey, I had to find somebody. There was nobody around. Find somebody. And I was like, hey, she said she needs to push. And the nurse is like, oh, no, she's not ready yet. And she walks in and she goes, oh, that's a baby's head. And so they're frantically calling the doctor. I remember seeing that doctor come in the hospital on 2 wheels. Like, they're gowning her and gloving her as they're catching a baby. Yeah. As they're catching a baby. So that was a pretty wild ride for her. Easton did have fanfare. We took him to Akron Children's right after he was born.
Yeah. He was a couple of days old.
Yeah, a couple days old, and he spikes a fever. And again, who took you up? Who drove you?
I drove myself.
You drove yourself.
I drove myself to Union. I remember that was like mother's instinct because I told Michael, I mean, he was like 6 or 7 days old, I think. I said, he's not acting normal. Like a week old baby has a normal. And he didn't have a fever during the day. I remember we were doing whatever that day. And I said, he's not acting normal. Mm-hmm. And then right before I was going to put him to bed, I said, I'm just going to check his temperature. And he had a fever. Yeah. And I said, okay, I'm taking, when they're under a month old or something like that, they say they have a fever that like there's an issue. You need to take him to the hospital. So I did. And then
from there, they took you to Akron Children's.
Akron, yeah.
You called me and told me that you were going. At which point I become a basket case. Because again, I'm an hour away from you at this point. Like, we never did this stuff together. Like, it was always like, whatever. Which is, again, indicative of our story because we were always running opposite directions, it feels like. Yeah. You drive him, or they take you by ambulance.
Yeah.
To Akron Children's. Like, it was pretty serious. And I remember my brother offered to drive me up because I was in no shape to drive to Akron at that point. Because, again, I'm an absolute mess. Because was I working midnights then? I must have been working midnights then. So. And so whether I was sleeping or just getting home, something like that, it was some anomaly that when they decided to do. That's what it was. You were at the hospital. I was just getting home from work whenever you called me and said that you guys were going to Akron Children. Okay. So my brother drove me up, but before he got there to pick me up, I called Florence and told her what was going on. And again, she almost beat me to the hospital. She was just there. Like,
Yeah.
I walked in and she followed in very quickly behind me. Her and Mike walked in very quickly behind me, prayed, and everything was good. What was the situation?
They said he must have just had a little virus.
Yeah.
The worry in such a small baby was like meningitis,
Yes.
I think,
Yeah.
which could be deadly.
Yeah.
And so that was the big, like,
Yeah.
is it this? But he never got progressively worse. His fever wouldn't go away. His heart rate wouldn't.
Yeah.
But he didn't get worse. So they were, before the test came back, they were pretty positive it wasn't that.
Yeah.
But we were up there for 4 or 5 days.
That was a long stint.
Yeah.
And then again, just back to Adeline, like after the delivery, no fanfare there.
No.
So it was pretty normal. But one of the things that I learned in all of that, which I think is important to share, this was my first life lesson, I think, with you. And it didn't come until after Adeline was born, the realization didn't come until after Adeline was born. When Emmett came, we were quote unquote new parents. So, we were raising Aaron and Aiden every other weekend, but they were big enough
to toddlers, so it wasn't. There was different when they're
potty
newborn.
training and things like that. It wasn't nothing like we didn't have babies.
Yeah. With us all the time.
Right. So like you have to learn how to pack a diaper bag and all of those things. And so we set up a nursery for Emmett. Like it was all the cutesy, like sock monkeys and chevron rugs, and like it was to the nines. Yeah, it was to the nines. Yeah. Like giant buttons hanging on the wall. It was ridiculous, quite honestly. And I spent an afternoon doing that because it was what you wanted and how you wanted. We put a glider in there so that you could rock the baby. But after Emmett came home, you were very weird with me, and it wasn't in a bad weird. It was just like he would cry, you would pick him up, and you would walk out of the room, and it was just very different. It was like you very much so. That maternal instinct kicked in for you, and it didn't for me the same way. Like I was not paternal at all. Then when Easton came home, again, that instinct to know that he was sick, and then like you handled all of the diapers, and you were very specific about cloth diapers and like all of the things that happened. And then with Adeline, that's when the realization came that like postpartum is a real thing, but you didn't like tell me directly that that's what you were dealing with, but I also didn't know that it was a thing. So it took me a long time to realize that it was very real.
Yeah.
And that I had experienced it 3 times but didn't know. So that was one of those moments for me where I learned that my wife won't always tell me when something is wrong, but usually I can tell when something is wrong. So which you get sick of hearing that question. What's wrong? Is everything okay? Are you upset? What's going on? You don't seem to be yourself. And you're just like, shut up. But there's our meeting story, and then all 3 of the kids, the young kids coming into our lives. Aaron and Aiden were a little bit different because, again, like I said, we took over. Like when we got together, when we took over that parenting, that co-parenting role, they were already toddlers. But let's just
they were when we got married, they were 2 and 3.
Yeah, let's just talk about that though, because Aiden didn't talk at all. No. Aaron talked specifically for Aiden. Aiden would stand there and stare at you when you asked him if he wanted something, and then Aaron would say he wants and would answer for him. I don't know if he was right or not, but Aiden never argued.
I was gonna say Aiden didn't protest. So we just went with it.
Yeah. What was the potty training with Aiden? It was cupcakes. Like we'll give you cupcakes if you go on the potty. And then one day he decided he was going to be potty trained, and that was that. It was his birthday, wasn't it?
It was really close.
Close there too.
Yeah,
like
he was definitely the oldest. I think he was almost 4.
Yeah, and he decided that was when he was going to be potty trained, and he did it.
And he was fine.
Yeah. Never looked back. We have a lot of really great memories with just the 2 of them, like the Legoland vacation, which they still razz me about because I got a speeding ticket. Dad, you want to get a speeding ticket like you did at Legoland? I love them both, but man, to the moon. To the moon. But they are, so that was a little bit different with them, but we did, I mean, my gosh, so much with just the 2 of them, and the travel portion and all of the things. And we'll get into, like, as they've grown up, how life has changed for us and custody and all of those things. But life was life has been interesting with kids.
For sure.
Originally the name of the podcast was going to be Married with Children, but again, avoiding any lawsuits that may be impending with that. So we decided that we were going to pivot a little bit, but the majority of our marriage is based on the fact that we have 5 kids.
Yeah.
Like who we are, how we are not identified as mom and dad, or my identity doesn't fall in that pastor title or in that general manager title. My identity rests in who Jesus has called me to be, who God has called me to be. But at the same time, on earth, that's who we are. Like when people meet us, they're like, you have 5 kids. We're like, yup, we sure do. And they recognize that it's, it is a lot for us.
And I feel like especially like right now in our lives,
where they're all at the age that they're doing something.
Yeah. It's just kind of, that's where our lives revolve around something.
Our kids have better social lives than we do.
Oh, for sure.
Like they probably have more adult interaction than you and I have.
Yeah.
Our adult interaction comes from you and I directly, our immediate families. Like you talk to your sister regularly on the phone.
Yeah.
And then me, all of my folks at work.
Yeah.
And then our church people. But like our adult conversation, especially yours, comes from on the phone conversations or me.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's, and again, while our identity is not found in that, it is a prideful spot for us. Like that's a spot where we can be proud of what we've accomplished in our kids' lives. And, one of the things that we say regularly is that we break generational curses. I don't want my kids to grow up feeling the same way I felt growing up. And I had great parents. Like, don't get me wrong. But I mean, like we were poor and we ate a ton of Hamburger Helper and a ton
Both of us grew up very poor.
Right. Like we didn't have a lot to show. Like whenever I graduated, I had to buy my own car. I paid for my own senior pictures. I bought my own class ring. And not that like my parents wouldn't, it's that they couldn't. They physically couldn't. I was the third. I was the youngest of 3 kids. Everything that my parents had to give, they had pretty well given at that point. And so I knew the value of hard work very early on. I had a job when I was young at Arby's, which I hated, but I did that job every day because I didn't have a choice. It was that or nothing. But before that, before I was even old enough to have like a real job, I worked as a busboy at the River Biscuit. Which isn't there anymore. It's in Tusky.
That's before my time.
Yeah, it was like, old school. And I would go in there and I would bus tables and get tips. Like that was how I survived.
Yeah.
But I always knew the value of working hard. And I don't have a college education.
Isn't that funny?
I'm
the one with the college degree in this relationship, and he's wildly more successful than I am.
And we joke about this a lot, but I have all of the street smarts. Like I get like the practical life skills, the logic stuff. When it comes to book smarts, you'll stomp me any day of the week, unless we're playing trivia. Trivia. Yeah. You hate that. Yeah. Call me Ishmael. There's so much to life that you can't expect to ever have come out the way that it does. Yeah. We didn't plan to, move to Licking County and then move back. We didn't plan to have 5 children. We didn't plan to pastor a church. None of that was planned. We have genuinely, for the most part in our lives, just allowed God to take control.
Yeah.
Buying a house, all of those things was all seriously
God.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
And we'll share some of those stories as we move along. But I just feel like I hope that everything that we've shared today gives insight to how good God is, number one, because that first and foremost is the most important for us. But then number 2, just like gives you insight into how we operate, how we tick, what makes us think the way that we think. And then because that will help you to understand like the struggles that we share and the fun that we share. But life is beautiful chaos. It really is. It is not orchestrated for us in any way. There are some days that I text you and say, where am I supposed to be? Because you tell me like, hey, go pick up this kid over there and drop this one off over here. But it is beautiful chaos for us. And we love what we do. So we hope you've enjoyed so far, and we'll see you on the next episode.